to Another Chance Church. Uh, we um, we are once again outdoors, and I made a comment last week. I don't know how long I'm going to announce that, but I do have a new announcement this week, and that is that we have been allowed a space on private property to meet. So we're still right on the sidewalk, so that we're out in public where we can be seen, but we're not impeding on any public property. So the owners of the store Salting and Sweet and the restaurant Blacksmith Grill have been kind enough to allow us to use a little piece of their property here, so that just so that we're not encroaching on any public space and not having to worry about the potential for breaking any codes or doing anything that's not entirely legal, because we don't want to set that as an example either. So that being said, I just wanted to thank them. Once again, we are also meeting every week at 2 p.m. on Sunday at Black Rifle. They're open till 4 on Sundays, so we're sitting there for at least those 2 hours, just to be available and out in the public. So if people want to come connect with us, want to come talk to us, awesome. We're here. We're here for whatever you need from us. It is Market Days weekend, so there's some activity going. We're actually out Sunday morning, right about the time that everybody's setting up and getting ready to kick off the day, and so that's hopefully going to bring some more traffic, but might also bring some more noise. Found out last week the microphone that we've got now is pretty good. Still get some noise in there, but we're kind of excited about that, and we're just, like I said before, this is just a learning process, and we're excited to be doing this and to be learning as we go, and excited for those of you who are finding us and hanging out with us. And clearly it is a little chilly this morning. I figure you probably already figured that out, but if you get some shivers and some weird vocals, just understand that it's about 34 degrees right now, I think. Thank goodness the wind is not blowing like it was yesterday, so that's a plus. With that, again, I want to remind you we have the website, accboerne.com. You are more than welcome to see what we're about. Go do some private investigation on us. I guess it's not really private, I'm telling you, but check us out, see who we are if you want to. We have a giving page there if you'd like. We'd be honored if you feel led to do that. We also have a page there called Glover Witness Wear. So we've got some t-shirts and stuff that we're able to produce and send out. So if you would like to financially assist, but giving is not really your thing, we have a way for you to purchase some stuff from us. It's all just to help fund the church and help us to make this a better experience for you guys. No, I'm not leaving. That's not going to be part of the better experience. But everything other than that, pardon me. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to my wife to pray for the service, and then we will jump into the content today.
Good morning. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for us having a space where we're out of the way but can still be with the people. Please bring your presence to us and wrap us in your words so we don't notice the chilly weather this morning, and help us reach all of those who need you today. Thank you and amen.
All right, so we have been on a series ever since we started this Church on the Street thing. We've been on a series about the Sermon on the Mount. Sorry, I'm just a little less prepared, I feel, this morning, and I don't know why, but the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. We started of course, at the beginning of that, with Jesus goes up on the side of a mountain. He takes his disciples, but we also see that there's a large crowd there. And he begins teaching on the Beatitudes. We covered that fairly in depth. Then he goes from the Beatitudes and talks about talks about that we as kingdom citizens are to be the salt and the light of the world. Moves on from there and talks about how he is here to fulfill the law, and that the law is not going away, and he's not destroying it or throwing it out, but he's fulfilling it. That was last week. And I definitely encourage you, if you missed any of those, to go back and catch up on those. The reason we're going at this in depth is just because we live in a different culture and society now than he did, and he spoke to the people, to the audience that was there in front of him, and there was a lot more expectation for understanding, whereas we have moved quite a bit further away now. And while the content is still true, we have a tendency to really overcomplicate things and really try to get outside the box and make the scripture fit what we want it to, instead of realizing that what we're given is there to shape us. And so it takes a little more explanation about what was going on at the time and what really is meant, and how simple the scripture really is, and how not simple we are. So that's why we're taking a little more time on this than he did. And I apologize. I guess it's the cold weather, but it's kind of messing with my throat. So I'll try to keep that. Down. But sounds like I'm going to be clearing my throat a little bit. Anyway, so last week, Jesus promised to fulfill the law in the section we looked at. And after that, he decides to talk about what we are capable of. What our natural tendencies are. And so before I get into that, what I want to start with is that we live in a culture today, and it's been around, this idea has been around for a long time, but we live in a culture today that is very much follow your heart, do what makes you happy. I've heard that all my life. I know that the generation before me heard that all their life, and it's been around for a long time. But in the most recent of years, that has become very much a, how do I want to say this? So while I was growing up, while we did have that understanding, that saying, follow your heart, do what makes you happy and all that, we still also had a deep understanding of community and good for all, and that we needed to be and that we needed to be postured so that we could see other people and to do good for, like I said, for all. Nowadays, that follow your heart and do what makes you happy thing has become very, very internal and very, very self-serving. And you can see, just looking around on social media and the media, on TV, and just all the different places where you see people, what you see is this overwhelming selfishness and total disregard for anybody outside myself. And so what we have turned the follow your heart kind of ideal into today is follow your heart and forget everybody else. And it doesn't matter who you hurt and that has become very much, and it may not be as bad. I may be overstating it some for most people, but we see that in a lot of people in the places that are most public. That's the most of what I see these days, is people who are just steadfastly determined to do for themselves, and if you get in the way, then too bad, I'm going over you, I'm around you, whatever. And so we've got just this self-serving, don't look beyond me kind of ideal. Then we get groups who have certain interests that come in and start twisting that up and telling people what their heart is telling them to do and that they need to follow that. And if your heart's not telling you this, then you're wrong. And look, I'm not going to name names called, I'm not going to call anybody out or anything like that. You know somebody like that. You know some group like that. You're thinking of a group like that right now. There's a bunch of them out there. But that's kind of where we live today. We live in this whole idea, especially in Western society, of follow my heart, of my rights, of my God-given rights, or what's good for me, or what's okay for me. We have this very self-centered attitude toward the world and life and all that today that just overrides, in so many cases, all our good sense, all of our community mindedness, all of our servant attitude is just overridden by don't step on my rights. Don't get in the way of what makes me happy because we're going to have problems. In Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, all the way back in the Old Testament, even there it says, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? So the point is, this whole follow your heart kind of ideal that the world has today couldn't be more wrong. Because your heart, my natural, my natural world created predisposition is to be self-serving. If I'm going to follow my heart, then I'm going to step on people, and I used to do it. So understand, I'm speaking from experience. If I follow my heart, other people get hurt. And I don't really care about that. When I get into that position, when I get into that situation, it's all about what I want, and other people do pay the price, and I will convince myself that what I'm doing is okay because it makes me happy, and it's a selfish place to be. So the next section you see in the Sermon on the Mount, in your Bible probably, and it is in mine, it's titled, Murder Begins in the Heart. So Jesus in Matthew 5, verse 21 says, you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Twice in the Old Testament we see this verse, twice specifically in the Pentateuch. In the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that is the story from creation to the nation of Israel entering into the promised land and becoming a nation for the first time. That is the story of God's people being formed. So twice, once in Exodus 20:13, and then repeated in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 17, we see you must not murder. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is part of a kind of important list. A little bit bigger list than this one. It's a list that's important enough to appear twice in those first 5 books, and of course what I'm talking about is the 10 Commandments. We see, and the story, Charlton Heston, playing Moses. I'm sorry, I'm old, so a lot of you might not get that. There's an old movie, about the 10 Commandments. But anyway, this is where the Hebrews reached Mount Sinai. They have had an encounter with God. He spoke to them from the cloud on top of the mountain. It freaked them all out. They got scared. They told Moses, you know what, we're going to sacrifice you. You go talk to him. And then you just tell us what he has to say because we don't want to deal with that. So Moses goes up on the mountain. He's talking to God. God gives him these tablets with the 10 Commandments engraved on them. He carries them back down. The Israelites have done something stupid. He gets mad. He throws them down, breaks them. And then, before he even gets a chance to tell him what he talked to God about, they've already screwed the whole thing up. And so then he has to go back up and hand carve them himself. And it's a long story, and I'm sure we'll get into it in a lot greater detail. But that's where we're at. That's where these come from. It's the very first directions that God gives his people after bringing them out of Egypt. It's the very first written directions he gives them. This is where the entire law starts from. And if you look at the Ten Commandments, there's a set of this is how you treat God laws, and then there's a set of this is how you treat others laws. So that's how it's broken up. And if you really look at it, it pretty much covers all of life. If you do these things, then you'll get it right. Anyway, sorry, that's a real rabbit trail that I went down I didn't intend to, but that's where we're at. The Ten Commandments are handed off, and one of them is thou shalt not murder. So Jesus goes back and he talks about this. Well, that's kind of an extreme thing. It's not really something that most of us really feel like we need to be told, don't kill people. Yeah, that's kind of almost a natural understanding. But then in verse 22, Jesus goes on to say, but I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. So if you're angry with your brother, that's literally how far back he runs this thing to start making an example. In the study Bible that I use, it points us to 1 John verse 3, or 1 John chapter 3 verse 15, which says anyone who hates another brother or sister is really a murderer at heart. And you know that murderers don't have eternal life within them. So in this scripture, we really kind of see the connection that Jesus is making is if you hate them in your heart, then you're essentially already guilty of murder. Essentially, if you're angry with somebody, and we've all done it, you can deny it, but we've all done it. If we didn't say it out loud, we still thought it in our head. Everybody's gotten mad at somebody and thought or said, yeah, I'm gonna kill you, or something along those lines. It's just part of us. It's an angry, it's a snap thing, and we probably didn't even really mean it. Like, we were never planning on taking action on that, but it came out. The words were there, the thought was there, at least in some little flash of a moment, the intent really actually was there. Whether it was something that you allowed to grow or you just threw out there and then it was over, or maybe even you said it and then felt guilty about it and immediately were like, oh no, that's not okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And I've really honestly been in all three of those different situations. But we've all gone there, at least momentarily. Let's see. So how does hate or anger translate to murder? Kind of jumped ahead of myself and talked about that, but that's really it, is that it all starts somewhere. In Proverbs 8:21, it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. So right there, we see a part of it is that you can affect somebody greatly just with what you say. You can affect yourself greatly with what you say. I don't know any clearer way to say it. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. And James chapter 3 verse 6 says, and among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. So I've heard preachers and even in secular places, I've heard people talk for my whole life about how you can't tame the tongue. And the most powerful muscle in your body is this little 2-3 ounce slab of stupid that lives in your mouth. That's my paraphrase, but that's basically what they've talked about and said, is that it is so easy to let that thing fly on its own and so hard to fix what it does. Sometimes maybe even impossible. But we're seeing here, and I'm going to go back to Proverbs, death and life in the power of the tongue. The point is, consider what you say to people, because, you know, it may sound a little snowflake of me, but words do hurt. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well you can deal with that. It doesn't matter how well you hide that hurt, or, you know, how much it looks like you brush it off. That gets in there. When it enters your ear and gets into your brain, it lives there. No matter what you do with it, it still lives there and starts trying to burrow its way in. Pardon me. For example, the word that Jesus used, and some of the Bibles don't translate this. I intentionally chose one that left this word in there, but he used that word, and I'm trying to say the pronunciation the way that I heard, the way that I heard it pronounced in my Blue Line Bible on my phone app, because I figured they probably have a better idea of how it originally sounded. But they say Raka, and it's Raca, but it sounds like it starts with an H. But the translation of that word that Jesus used is empty, i.e. senseless or empty-headed man. And it was a term of reproach used among the Jews in the time of Christ. So essentially, Jesus called them out on this term that was commonly used to, you know, when they got frustrated with people, when they got mad at people or something like that. And this term literally means empty-headed man. So the point there is, when you say that to somebody, you may say something like that to me, and I may be like, yeah, whatever. I don't care about your opinion. But you know what? They got in there. And that's going to live in there. And the more often somebody says that to me, the bigger that pile of that word and the insecurities that can come along with that word gets. You know, today, that would be kind of a first century equivalent to what today would be calling somebody, look at somebody and be like, yeah, genius, good way to go. Or, hey, Einstein, you know, that whole, yeah, stop looking at me like that because I have a bad tendency to do something like that. But that whole sarcastic way of applying a word that should be good to somebody who does something that's not good. You know, you call somebody genius because they're an idiot, and they know what you mean. And the whole, that carries weight. It carries weight, and it sinks in. And over time, especially depending on who it comes from, if that comes from somebody who you look up to, if that comes from somebody who should be in a leadership type place, or somebody that, oh, I can't think of my words this morning, I haven't had any coffee yet. But if that comes from somebody who you look up to, who means something to you, then that cuts even deeper. You know, but it doesn't matter who it comes from. If you're talking like that to somebody, you are tearing them down, whether you realize it or not, whether they admit it or not. So I'm going to ask you a question. Has anyone ever hurt you with words? And I'm going to answer that question for you, because they have. Because if you have lived this life for any amount of time, somebody has said something that has cut you. And you have wished that they had not. And you have been upset with that, or maybe you expressed that to them and they, you know, and they responded to it. Or maybe you just took that and buried it down, and it's kind of just festered and hurt and dug that hole, and you haven't really dealt with it. But somebody's hurt you with words, and I want you to grab onto that and realize that your words have done that to somebody else. And the words you say tomorrow might do that to somebody else. What Jesus is saying to us in this passage is, yeah, the law says don't murder, but what I'm telling you is murder really is a much broader definition than just taking someone's life, because you can murder somebody's spirit, you can murder somebody's dreams, you can murder somebody's will to live, and all of that, anything that hurts someone can eventually lead to some form of death in their life, whether it's whether it's mental or spiritual or an actual physical death. All of that can lead to that. So it's not just murder. It's you need to look at your relationship with people, even the little things that don't seem like they're a big deal. I still feel like I'm just sitting here beating myself with this because I'm a guy and I work with a bunch of guys and we pop off to each other, and there's a very fine line between that playful whatever and actually hurting somebody. And I have crossed that line even at work. And I try to recognize it when I do, and I try to walk it back and tell them, but if I didn't play so close to that line, I might not cross it at all. So James 2:20, this may not seem to fit, but give me a minute. It says, "How foolish! Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless?" Well, in this case, what you don't say might be the good deed. In this case, when you realize I'm about to say something really nasty to somebody and maybe I shouldn't, maybe that's the good deed. The good deeds don't always have to be recognizable outside yourself to still be good deeds. And of course, if you do have a reason to be angry with someone, now the original text, Jesus said, if you're angry with someone without cause. So that kind of opens up a little door to, oh, well, if I have reason to be angry with somebody, it's okay, right? No, that's not how it works either, because if you do have a reason to be angry with someone, this is a call to forgiveness. And if you really pay attention to who Jesus is, kind of a big deal to him. If you've heard of him, you probably already know that. If you haven't heard of him, you study him a little bit and you're going to find out, he went to the cross and died and rose again and all of that to bring us forgiveness. So yeah, forgiveness is kind of a thing for this guy. You might want to consider that when you're holding something against somebody else. Moving on, in verse 23, Jesus says, "Therefore, if you bring your gifts to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you," hold on, because Jesus just kind of flipped the table on us here. He turned the table on us here, not flipped the table. That's the whole other verse with him, with whips and chasing people, and that's a fun thing that we're going to get into at another time. But he turns the tables on us here, and says, if you screwed up and gave somebody a reason to be mad at you, and the whole reason that I'm stopping here to bring that up is because what Jesus is saying is you need to examine yourself. If you're coming to the altar, if you're coming before God himself, which, if you're going to pray to Jesus, you're coming before God himself. If you're going to pray to the Father, you're coming before God himself. If you want to have a daily living relationship with the Holy Spirit, you are encountering God himself. So if you're planning on encountering God himself, you need to examine yourself first. But he says, if you remember that your brother has something against you, starting in verse 24, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come offer your gift. If we've wronged someone, we are responsible for trying to right that. You can't just take everything to God and attempt to avoid the mess you've made because, well, it's in God's hands now. I know I stole some money from you last week, and I went and asked God for forgiveness about it, so I'm just going to not talk to you about that and not worry about it because God's got it. No, that's not how it works, man. God ain't your mama, all right? It's not his responsibility to clean up your messy junk with other people. God is your father. He is in the game of helping you out when you get in over your head. He is in the business of realizing that you have dug a hole that you can't get out of and helping you to deal with that and helping to orchestrate things. But you have to take responsibility for the stupid that you've done. And we all have stupid that we've done. We all have. I'm going to do it again. I know. I'm sorry. But there's a line that the Black Widow in one of the Avenger movies says, and it really fits here. We all have red in our ledger. We all have debt. Something we've done, something that needs to be taken care of, something that we have left hanging out there that we need to examine ourselves and find that and then deal with it. Not just finding it, but then dealing with it. Because maybe those words that you said to somebody that cut them deeply, maybe you haven't thought about that since you said them, but they do. Maybe that's something that's a daily part of their struggle because somebody out there thinks I'm an idiot. No, somebody out there thinks I think they're an idiot. And kind of lost myself there and all that. But if somebody out there thinks that I think they're an idiot and that matters to them, then that can affect them daily and it doesn't affect me at all. Does that mean that it's not my responsibility? No, of course not. If I did that to somebody, hey, little little music to go with our service this morning. I don't know if that's going to translate through or not, but I'm just going to talk through it for a minute, but I'm going to ramble because I don't want to have to cut any important parts out. And if you see a cut in the film right there, it's because of the music coming through. And hey, we're in public. That's what happens. All right. So I don't know how much of that we're going to have to cut or how big the gap is or, how hard a cut you just saw. But that's all right. It's part of what we're doing here. I got to find my spot now. So what I was saying is you have to understand that the things that you say to other people may hurt them, and it is your responsibility to try and go make good on that. However, also understand this. Gaining the forgiveness of others, that's beyond your control. All you can do is try to make it right. You are responsible for going to people that you have hurt, for going to people that have reason to be upset with you. You have a responsibility to go to them and to make an attempt to make it right. An honest attempt. Not just a, hey, sorry, and whatever. But to actually go to them and say, look, man, I know I messed up, and I know I did something wrong. And how do I make this right? How can I show you, how can I prove to you that I am sincere in my apology? However, if they choose to refuse the gesture, if they don't accept your apology, if they don't give the forgiveness that you come and ask them for, that's not your decision. That doesn't mean puff up and get mad and storm off or say something stupid to them again because, now you're mad because they blew you off. That doesn't mean that you're still responsible for the hurt you caused them because you did honestly and sincerely try to right it. So you can walk away without anger toward them because you know what? You don't know what they've dealt with. But you can also walk away without the guilt of that on you anymore. Seeking forgiveness is your responsibility. Gaining forgiveness is the responsibility of the person that was wronged. So, or giving forgiveness is their responsibility. Anyway, if they don't, you've done your part. In verse 25, he kind of changes a little bit and goes a slightly different way. He's still talking about the whole anger thing, but he says, in verse 25, Jesus says, agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. Now, the reference Jesus is making here is a reference to debt, a monetary debt, but like I said before, it all translates into debt. It all is something that we have, done wrong to somebody else, and then we need to make good on. Pardon me. So when he says until you paid the last penny, that also means until you have done every exhaustive thing in your power to make right whatever wrong you have done to somebody. It's not all about money. And this is kind of where I'm going to get back into where I started, or some stuff I said earlier. Understand, when it says agree with your adversary quickly and stuff like that, first of all, understand not every hill is worth dying on. Not every time that I have an opinion and somebody has an opposing opinion, it's not okay and it's not good every time for me to just stand my ground. No, absolutely not. I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm not budging on this. I mean, maybe I am right, maybe they are wrong, but sometimes it just doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. If we do it your way rather than my way, sometimes that's okay. And then other times, sometimes you are wrong. Sometimes I am wrong. That doesn't apply. Never mind. I just forget I said that because I'm never wrong. But that's the case. Sometimes we get into this position. We have our opinion or our position or our whatever, and we dig in our heels and we're like, no, absolutely not. This is where I'm going to make my stand. And if you were to take a second and step back and really see it, and I've done this, I've had this happen to me. Sometimes you step back and you're like, oh no, wait, I screwed that one up, didn't I? I am in fact wrong here, and then we have to decide if we're going to, own up to that and apologize, or are we still going to die on the hill even knowing that we're wrong in our thing. So that's, it's kind of some of the stuff you need to examine in the moment to determine, am I wrong? You need to be able to ask yourself that question. Am I actually wrong? And if I'm not wrong, does being right really matter that much? Is it that important to be right in this situation? Even if you aren't wrong, sometimes it is better to reference a verse just a little further into this text and turn the other cheek. Sometimes you're going to feel attacked because somebody says that your opinion is wrong or disagrees with you. And whether they're attacking you or not, it's going to feel like that sometimes. And sometimes you just need to take that and say, okay, I'm not going to fight you about it. I'm not going to, I'm not going to throw it back at you or anything. Even if it turns out that I'm right and you're wrong, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to move on. Your God-given rights are never as important as taking an opportunity to reach the lost. And sometimes that means laying down some of those rights for the good of the person that you're dealing with. Sometimes, even though you have to accept being mistreated in order to do right by somebody else, you need to do that. Sometimes your patriotism gets in your way and doesn't allow you to be a proper kingdom citizen. Sometimes you need to forget the American flag and start thinking about the cross. Hate mail can be addressed to accboerne@hotmail.com because, I'm stepping on that. Sometimes your defense of your rights, which legally is okay, is still, in a kingdom sense, wrong and misused. Sometimes you need to get your ego out the way. And that is beating on me as well. Understand that. But that is the case. And that leads us directly into the very next heading in the Sermon on the Mount. And that very next section is adultery in the heart. So in verse 27, Jesus goes into another of the Ten Commandments. He says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. Here again, Jesus references the Ten Commandments. So those people out there who claim that the Big Ten don't apply to us anymore, Jesus is kind of disagreeing right here in his very first big sermon. And honestly, I'm going to err toward the side of what Jesus is doing because, he kind of reaffirms the Ten Commandments twice in this first chapter of the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, anybody who says that the Ten Commandments does not apply to us anymore, Jesus disagrees. You should just not really take a whole lot of what they're saying to heart because they're clearly not getting it. That's just a side note, though. Pardon me. So 27, he says, you should not commit adultery. 28, he says, but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Go back to Proverbs in the Old Testament, one of the wisdom books. Proverbs 6:25 says, do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. I'm going to ruin some people's day right now. Okay? Affairs don't happen by accident. You didn't slip on some ice and fall into sex with some random stranger. That just didn't happen. Okay? It's not something that was outside your control or something that you didn't plan on. Cheating starts in your head, in your heart. This is what Jesus is talking about. It starts in your thoughts, and then you begin to allow yourself to be placed into positions that test your loyalty. And before long, your resolve dissolves. Yeah, I rhymed that on purpose. It seemed like it would work better on paper. But cheating happens because you continually put yourself in a position where you are breaking down the barriers and you're breaking down your defenses for it. If there is someone in your life who supports and even helps you get into those compromising situations, you need to cut them out of your life. Stop hanging out with them. Stop going around them. Because they have even less respect for your relationship than you do. Infidelity is a choice that the cheater makes long before the physical act occurs. And you have no excuse. Look, I don't care what the situation is. I don't care how you try to explain it away or how you try to be like, you know what? I just ran into this girl at the bar and one thing led to another, and you know what? It didn't happen that night. It started long before that. Because it's not that simple. It's not that cut and dry. You made the decision to start this, and it probably started with somebody you passed in the grocery store, somebody you saw at the gym, somewhere you were going online that you shouldn't have been going. You know, you start breaking down these defenses and start twisting up your head and messing with your loyalty, and over time, all of a sudden there's an opportunity that happens in a physical sense, and you no longer have the defenses in place to avoid that. And that's not an excuse to get you out of it. That's telling you you need to think now about what's going to happen when somebody tests your relationship in the future, because if you're not prepared for it now, you're going to fail then. There is no excuse for you to be unfaithful to your spouse. Again, hate mail can be addressed to accboerne@hotmail.com. I'm not giving you my physical address because, like I said, I'm sure I ruined some people's day right now. And if you have, you know what, this isn't even in my notes, but if you have crossed that line and you have a significant other who is big enough and mature enough and believes in you enough to move past that and to not end the relationship for it and to try to help you to repair that relationship, you need to thank God daily for that individual, because you have destroyed any trust that that person should have in you. So if you know somebody, or if you are somebody who has cheated and then your other half stayed, then you are operating on borrowed time. You have no right to the relationship that you're in, and you definitely need to learn how to appreciate it far better. And if they stayed and you cheat again, just don't even ask them to stay again. Let them, okay, I'm not a counselor. I'm just going to go ahead and stop there, but I'm just saying, understand what you've got. Moving on, in verse 29, Jesus goes on to say, in verse 29, Jesus goes on to say, If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for the whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. That's some pretty vivid imagery. If your eye causes you to sin, remove it and get rid of it. Now, before you start going and, and mutilating yourself, let's go to Colossians chapter 3, verse 5. That one says, so put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. That same verse in the New King James Version starts with, therefore put to death your members which are on the earth. And then it goes in to talk about the sinful and the lustful and the greedy. So, referencing back to the text, if your human nature causes you to sin, and it does, then get rid of it. So it's not, I do not believe that Jesus was literally suggesting that people cut off body parts and get rid of them. But what he is saying to them in a very dramatic and very visual way is the way you're built is not acceptable and is not compatible with the kingdom of heaven. And you have to figure out where that incompatibility is and be willing to get rid of the parts that are incompatible, because it's better for you to lose part of your nature and enter heaven than for you to be in hell because you refuse to give up anything. There's two major takeaways from this verse. One, this world and culture are inherently contradictory to righteousness. James 4:4 says, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy to God? I say it again, if you want to be friends of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. So, when he says your right hand, your right eye, when Colossians says, therefore put the members to death which are on this earth, that very easily translates to your connection to the follow your heart kind of idealism is the problem, because your heart doesn't work right. Your heart is not concerned about righteousness and about the well-being of others and about the well-being of yourself even. So you need to take that part of you, which is not a tangible part. It's not as tangible as your right hand or your right eye, but it's a part that only you can see. And you need to take that part and give that to God and say, I don't want this to keep me from your presence. And he will cast that away from you. He will remove that. He will start fixing that and repairing the broken part of you that keeps you from him. The second takeaway is nothing in your life is more important than God. Understand that. Nothing in your life. Nothing. Can I say it clear enough? Nothing. Not your job, not your money, not the sports your kids play, not your own body, not even your loved ones. Luke 14:26, Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. No, this does not mean that Jesus is actually telling you to hate anyone. What he's saying is, if you want to be my disciple, then I have to be in first place. And second place can't even be close enough to first to cause confusion. If anything even looks to be as important or more important than your relationship with Jesus Christ, then it becomes the idol that breaks your relationship with Jesus Christ. You need to be so certain of who you are in him that nothing else can come close. I love my wife and kids. I can't even put into words. I would I know people say this all the time, but I would step in front of a bullet for any one of them at any time. And I've got one out there acting a fool right now that doesn't want anything to do with me, that hates me, and does everything he can to make me give up on him. And still, I would step in front of a bullet for that kid, even though I know that he wouldn't appreciate it. I don't care. I love my family, and they know that. But my family also knows that my priority list is God, my wife, my kids, and everything else comes after that. They know that. And it has to be that way. Because if anybody gets up here in this relationship, above this relationship with God, then it messes up the priority list for everything else. And yes, my wife, I prioritize above my kids. Why? Because my wife and I have committed to each other for the rest of our lives. My kids are going to grow up and leave the house and start their own lives and have their own thing. And I want to teach them how to be successful with that. And I want to give them as much as I can to make sure that they get that and they have an opportunity for a successful life and a successful relationship with God and a successful marriage. I want to give them that. But my relationship with them is meant to change and to become more distant. And I don't want to say temporary, but just not as close. My wife and I, we've committed to each other for the rest of forever, which is why the whole cheating thing I was talking about earlier is important to me, because I don't want to put myself in a position to upset that relationship. But again, even she knows that God comes first. Period. Has to. And I know that in her life, God comes first. Because if I come first, I'm going to screw that up. Because the person you are closest to is going to influence you the most. And if I am the highest priority in her life, I'm going to screw up the rest of her life. Because I don't know what God knows. I know that got a little rant-ish. But it needed to. What Jesus is saying in this passage, in the murder and adultery are in your heart passage, what he's saying is this: you cannot fulfill the law. You cannot do it good enough. And I know we talked about this last week, and it kind of sounds like I'm going back to that. But what he's saying here is, you know what? The whole follow your heart culture is bull. Follow your heart straight into hell. That's what's going to happen. Because your heart cannot. It doesn't care. It's not concerned with. It's not going to lead you to help other people. It's not going to lead you to follow God. If you follow your heart culture of today, then you alone are going to follow it straight into hell. And so are all these other people who are playing that same game. Because the selfishness, the self-serving is going to lead you into hating other people, because it doesn't matter if you like them or not, because you're doing your own thing. It's going to lead you into the adultery situation because, hey, I'm following my heart. My wife doesn't give me what I want and I need something different. And it's going to go into the greed thing. Hey, I need more money so I can get more crap, and I don't really care who I step on to get there. Follow your heart. It's going to lead you the wrong way. Or you give your heart to Jesus, he transforms it, and you follow his heart. And I promise you, it's more rewarding than anything else you're going to find. I don't care what it is you find out there. It is not anywhere close to the level of what Jesus can offer you. I love you guys. Got a little heated here for me for a minute, but it needs to. This is serious stuff. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you want to critique, whatever, I'm going to be over at Black Rifle here in a few hours, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. every Sunday, and I'm happy to discuss. If you need prayer, if you need anything else, you can reach us over there. You can reach us on the website, and we're praying for you. We love you, and we'll see you next week.